The taste of copper never fades. It coats my tongue like a memory I cannot swallow. A whisper of blood and rust that hums in rhythm with the lumen lights above my cell. The air here trembles, not with warmth but with the vibration of runes carved into ceramite and bone, their geometry biting into the world itself. I remember my name once, though I do not speak it. To do so would invite the thing inside to answer. It stirs when I remember and presses against the skin of reality like a breath behind glass, patient, smiling, endless. They told me this was penance, that my agony served the Emperor, but the wards throb and my flesh sings with voices not my own, somewhere beyond the reinforced bulkhead. I hear the echo of hymnals through vox grills, the chant of penitents who will never see the horror they praise. I reach for silence, but silence reaches back. If these words find you across the static of the void, offer one prayer to the throne for those who dwell in the dark between breaths, and let the machine spirits carry this transmission onward. The first thing I remember is sound, not a voice, but the vibration of iron. It was low, patient, the hum of a containment engine buried deep beneath the decks of the exultant grief. The note sank into my bones, making them sing with quiet terror. I tried to breathe, but the air was thick with incense and burnt data slate ash. Something was pressed over my mouth, something that reeked of sanctified oils. My eyelids refused to open at first, sealed with resinous wax. I felt it crack as I forced them apart, revealing the half-dark of a manufactorum sanctum turned shrine, where cogitator screens bled pale blue light. Across sigils drawn in blood, chains hung from the ceiling, dozens of them, each one, engraved with scripture so fine it could only have been etched by a tech priest's mechadendrite. They glimmered faintly, reflecting the orange pulse of lumen globes that flickered in imperfect rhythm. When I tried to move, the sound of those chains answered me, a hiss of links sliding against one another. My wrists were bound behind me, flesh cut by adamantine manacles wrapped in parchment strips that fluttered with the faintest servo draft. I could not feel my legs properly. They were pinned to the floor by something sharp, driven through the muscle. My vision swam. Between the blurs of motion I saw robed figures kneeling in circles, whispering in high Gothic, their faces hidden behind rebreathers and hoods stamped with the imperial aquila. I tried to ask where I was. The words formed in my throat but came out as a growl, not mine, too deep and layered as though someone else spoke with me. The sound frightened them. A few backed away. One of the adepts, the one with a vox grill stitched into his jaw, dropped his censer. I could smell the burning myrrh spill and die against the cold floor. Then came the Inquisitor. His boots made no sound on the deck. He carried no visible weapon, only a staff of beaten silver capped with a shard of obsidian that pulsed faintly, like a heart beneath glass. The others turned their heads toward him in reverence. He approached slowly, his eyes hidden behind the pale gleam of augmetic lenses. His voice, when it came, was quiet, not commanding, not cruel, merely inevitable. "You live," he said. "That is enough." I tried to ask again, to demand to know what they had done, but the words tangled into static. Something coiled beneath my skin. It wasn't pain yet. It was pressure, as though my own blood were trying to turn against me. He nodded to the acolytes, and they began the rite. The chamber filled with the sound of chanting. Not words I recognized, though the cadence was familiar. The same rhythm used in prayers to the Emperor, only inverted, hollowed out, made into a cage instead of a plea. The acolytes traced sigils on the floor, their movements perfect, mechanical, like servitors trained to precision. I watched as they drew circles within circles, all converging beneath me. When the first arc light of the seal ignited, I screamed. It was not fire that burned me, but faith. It surged through the chains and into my body, rewriting me from the inside out. My bones thrummed like tuning forks, My eyes rolled back, and in the moment between breath and blackout I saw it. A figure behind the Inquisitor made of smoke and wings and laughter. It smiled at me, teeth like starlight on black water, and whispered, "Finally." When I woke, I was alone. The room was quieter now, though the hum of the containment field never ceased. I could hear distant hymnals echoing down the ship's corridors, Vox-distorted voices singing of purity and obedience. My body hurt in ways that didn't make sense. There were runes carved into my arms, not painted, carved. Every heartbeat sent a pulse of light through them, faint and sickly. I tried to scrape one away with my teeth, but the flesh healed instantly, sealing the wound with molten gold veins that flickered beneath the skin. I wanted to believe I was dreaming, that this was a fever or punishment or illusion. But when I reached inward, I felt it, something vast and patient coiled in the hollow of my soul. It wasn't asleep. It was watching. "You called me," it said. The voice wasn't sound. It was sensation, the taste of ash, the echo of my heartbeat folding back on itself. I didn't answer. The presence laughed softly, almost kindly. "No need for words, little shell." The Inquisitor made a bargain. "You are the vessel. I am the truth beneath." I thrashed against the chains, screaming wordless denial. The sound that came out split the lumen globes. Glass rained from the ceiling. Sparks hissed across the floor. Somewhere deep in the ship's structure, an alarm howled in binary. I felt the wards surge again, a dozen containment fields activating at once. They burned through me, locking the entity back behind the veil of my mind. The pain was exquisite. I bit through my own tongue and tasted iron. Then silence returned. That was the moment I understood what I had become. Not a prisoner, not even a heretic. I was a weapon forged from blasphemy, sanctified by torment. The Inquisitor's voice came again, calm, distant, through a vox grill high in the ceiling. "Resist if you must. It makes the seal stronger." I looked up into the dark and whispered a prayer I no longer believed. For a heartbeat, I thought I felt the Emperor listening, but the laughter beneath my skin made me doubt. The light dimmed. The hum of the containment field deepened into something like a heartbeat. I realized it was mine, only slower, colder, and I began to remember how I came to be here. The memory unfolded in flashes. A ruined world under red skies. The Inquisitor's retinue descending from gunships, my voice raised in forbidden prayer. I had thought I was calling for deliverance, but the warp listens in its own language. What answered had not been salvation. Even now the scent of that world clung to me. Burning promethium, wet ash, and the sweetness of decay. I saw faces I had known twisted into shapes no human mind should endure. The demon had come through them, and when it looked at me, it recognized a doorway. I had not resisted. Not enough. The next moment in the memory was always the same. The Inquisitor's hand, cold as steel, pressed to my forehead. His eyes bright with pity. His words simple. "You are chosen." The binding began soon after. I tried to hate him for it, but as I lay chained in the sanctum, I understood that hatred was a luxury I no longer owned. The creature within me stirred again, curious, testing. "He bound me with your soul," it whispered. "Did you know that? Every scream feeds the seal. Every prayer strengthens my cage. You and I will never die apart." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the stars beyond the ship's hull, the endless black where light is swallowed whole. Somewhere out there, the Imperium still fought, still prayed, still burned worlds in the Emperor's name. I wondered if he could hear the prayers of something like me. I think that was the first moment I began to lose what was left of my faith. The first time they fed me was with a hooked tube and clipped prayers. The chirurgeon's hands did not shake. The mechadendrites did the trembling for him. a quiver of eager steel acknowledging the sacred geometry etched into my chest. I watched the needle hunt the vein as if it had its own appetite, and when it bit, the lumen hum in the walls rose until it matched the pitch of my teeth. A slurry of nutrients crawled into my blood, somewhere beneath my skin. The other presence tasted it through me and smirked without lips. I swallowed against the gag, found that I could not lift my head, and stared instead at the rust blossoming along the edge of a warded plate where incense had eaten paint into a halo. The taste of copper came back as if the room itself exhaled it. It tasted like discipline. It tasted like memory refusing to fade. Footsteps gathered, robed adepts, a silent interrogator with a slate of black obsidian, two Skitarii with helms sealed and optics smoldering like coals. They arranged themselves in the measured steps of a rite, and the interrogator read from a data slate that wept lines of white text into the half-dark. The words weren't for me. They addressed the machine spirit of the field and the legal fiction of my humanity. When he concluded, a single servo skull drifted down from the shadows with its vox grill crackling. Inquisitor Marchett spoke through it, his voice distant but unflinching, and the skull's empty socket seemed to look directly into mine as if sight could be carried by mere intention. "You are held in the Emperor's name," he said. "Your pain is the price of 1,000 lives kept safe from the thing that wears you. Breathe when you are told. Endure when you must. Disobey and the seal will teach you obedience." There was no anger in him. That made it worse. Mercy given shape can be defied. Necessity cannot. I tried to spit, but the tube caged my mouth and turned contempt into a wet cough. The Skitarii shifted, the click of their augmetic talons like punctuation. The demon inside me felt their presence and stretched, a shiver of pressure rippling across my ribs until the wards flashed dull gold and bit back. It laughed softly, a sound that tasted of old smoke and lawless promises, and sent a thought skittering along my skull like a bead of oil. They think the bars are steel. The bars are you. How faithful will you be, little shell? How long can a man hold his breath beneath a sea of knives? I tried to remember my name again, not to offer it, but to anchor myself against the undertow. It came faintly, a shape more than a sound, and with it the memory of a sky built from ash falling like slow snow. I had seen a cathedral flensed to bone. I had walked through a market of burned tents where charred aquilae crumbled beneath the tread of boots. That was where I met Marchett. Not as savior, not as executioner, but as a judge who also carried bandages. He had placed a gloved palm against my brow and told me that some sacrifices were chosen, and some were given. In the days that followed, I learned which kind I was. The interrogator approached with a file no larger than a tear. He held it to the servo skull's gaze as if to receive sanction. The skull dipped, and the interrogator snapped the glass against the air. The scent that opened with it was sweet and wrong, like flowers arranged in a morgue. He daubed a sigil onto my sternum with a brush of human hair, and the line burned as if it had been carved with a heated nail. The rune sank into me and joined the others, and for a heartbeat I heard a choir. Not the ship's monks, not the droning hymn that leaked through vents like steam. This choir sang from within bone, 1,000 thin voices holding one impossible note until my eyes watered. A servitor rolled forward on thick treads, its torso an altar, and its face a ruin of devotion. It positioned a lens above my heart and projected a pale circle of light that ticked like a clock. The interrogator placed both hands on either side of my ribs, closed his eyes, and whispered a calibration prayer. Every word made the circle tighten. Every syllable pressed the demon deeper into the corners of me where breath lives. I concentrated on the mechanics of lungs. In, out, in, out. The circle tightened further. Then the ship lurched. It was small, the kind of shudder that a superstructure shows when it slides through a patch of turbulent void. But down here in the sanctum, the motion translated as a brief, glorious failure. The lumen hum stuttered. the rune-seared manacles loosened by the width of a hair. The circle of light jutted across my heart and lost its perfect shape. The thing inside me did not hesitate. It moved like lightning trapped in a jar, slamming against the exact point where the ward had flickered. My vision inverted. For a fraction of a breath I saw the sanctum not as iron and oil and icon, but as a diagram of appetites. The Skitarii as wrapped wires of disciplined hunger. The interrogator as a lattice-work of grief bound tight into function. The servitor as a husk of prayer. And me, an hourglass turned sideways grain by grain trying to leak. I think I smiled. I think it smiled through me. The wards roared back too late to catch all of it, just enough to clip a wing. The interrogator swore in a language that started as low Gothic and ended as a static blurt from a vox bead. He slammed a palm into the altar servitor and the lens flared white, bathing my chest in a clean terror that smelled of burnt dust. The Skitarii leveled their galvanic weapons without quite aiming, the gesture of soldiers whose reflex is loyalty rather than thought. The servo-skull dipped closer until I could see the fine cracking along the sutures that held its jaw, and through that bone, Marchett spoke with a voice like a blade drawn along a sheath. Hold. I held. The demon held me. The circle closed by degrees that felt like centuries. And in the closing I understood another truth. The seal was not a wall, but a question asked and answered 1,000 times a second. Are you mine? No, are you mine? No, are you mine? No. Fatigue turns every answer to a confession. The copper flooded my mouth. The hum braided back into a steady note. The moment of near freedom slid past like a fish through dark water, and left only ripples of shame. When the crisis eased, the interrogator sagged, the mech ink on his wrists glistening with sweat. He looked at me not as at a specimen, but as at something that might keep him awake later when he pretended to sleep. It learns the rhythm of our rights, he said softly, more to the servo-skull than to me, and he learns the rhythm of its hunger. The skull's lenses whirred. Marchett answered with a phrase spare enough to be an order or a prayer. Then we changed the song. They changed the lights first, bathing the chamber in a colder spectrum that made the carved sigils look wet. They changed the prayers, reversing meter, skipping words that had once comforted me in shrines on burnt worlds. They changed the intervals at which the nutrient slurry entered my veins, so that the demon could not predict when sugar would arrive to feed the heart it wore like a mask. Discipline became a kind of weather. Unpredictable yet constant, a storm that never passed. I counted beats. I measured breaths. I learned to feel the minute shift in air pressure when a hidden door opened far down the sanctum's spine and a new crew of adepts came to replace the old. In the loneliness between shifts, the presence spoke again, not gloating now but curious. What did you see when the circle faltered? I told it nothing. It rewarded my silence by filling my mouth with phantom sweetness, honey on a battlefield. I saw them too. The wires, the lattice, the husk, and the hourglass that wants to be a blade. We could sharpen, you and I. We could become purpose instead of prison. Marchett wants that. He simply refuses to admit he and I pray to the same abstract god named Function. Function murders names, I whispered. The words scraped my throat raw, but it felt good to shape defiance into sound. The Skitarii did not react. The interrogator had gone. The servo-skull floated above, its vox quiet as a closed eye. I watched a single mote of incense ash drift through the pale light until it vanished against the lens. Sleep came like drowning. Not rest, a pressured descent. In that dark, the sensory leitmotif returned. The hum wore a voice, and the copper taste dragged a chain across my tongue. I dreamed the chain as a river. I dreamed the river as a road. At the end of that road, a door of black iron stood half open, and beyond it a chamber where someone knelt with their back to me, shoulders shaking, whispering a prayer too soft to hear. When the dream turned and I saw their profile, I recognized myself. Jaw clenched, eyes hollowed, mouth moving around a name I refused to give. I woke to the skull. Its jaw clicked, a tiny metronome. "The Inquisitor will attend in person," it said. "Prepare." The adepts returned, 3 of them this time, not the earlier set. New cadences of breath, new sweat beneath the oils. Sharp as fear kept too long under cloth. They adjusted the angles of the chains by increments that made my spine feel alien. They polished the warded plates until I could see my reflection distorted by lines of sanctity. A final acolyte cut the nutrient tube from my mouth and replaced it with a mask that sealed over lips and nose. The gasket cold and smelling faintly of machine grease and mint. Air flowed. Not freedom. Permission to continue. The door at the end of the sanctum lifted like a curtain of iron. Light did not pour in. Instead, the dark there seemed deeper than the dark here, as if he drew shadow behind him the way others draw capes. Inquisitor Marchett crossed the threshold without hurry, his staff resting against his shoulder, the shard at its tip beating like a heart that did not know or care for flesh. He paused a step inside the circle and laid 2 fingers on the edge of a ward. It flashed, a restrained lightning that climbed his hand like a tame serpent and sank into his sleeve. He nodded, satisfied. "Good," he said simply. "You are still here." I answered through the mask with a wordless sound that wanted to be a question. He understood anyway. "Because your presence holds the shape," he said. "Without you it is just noise and ash." He considered me as a stonemason considers a block, not cruelly, not kindly, just with a craftsman's intimacy. "There is a task ahead. We will ask you to bear it." The demon uncoiled slightly, pleased to be acknowledged. "Ask?" it purred along my nerves. "Or command?" I let it talk. I held the hum in my teeth and bit down. Marchett watched the tiny tremor along my jaw and almost smiled. "You will not be used lightly," he said at last, "but you will be used." The shard at his staff's tip flared, casting a thin blade of shadow across my chest where the new sigil still smoldered. The copper rose in my mouth as if anticipating a wound. He looked from the mark to my eyes and then beyond me, to a place only he could see where duty drew maps on the inside of his skull. "Do you consent?" he asked. The mask made it hard to laugh. The chains made it hard to gesture. Consent in a cell is theater. But the question was not for law. It was for something else. Something like hope wearing a disguise made of dust. I breathed. I tasted iron and old prayers. The demon held its breath with me, waiting to see which way the hourglass would tilt. The hum in the walls leaned forward as if the ship itself wanted to hear. Marchett's lenses caught the glow of the wards and threw it back as a pair of small, captive suns. He waited for my answer with the patience of one who already knew it. For in his world, obedience was not a choice but a physics, an inevitable collapse toward duty. I could not truly nod, but something in me inclined, a subtle yielding that felt like gravity giving way. The mask hissed, accepting the motion as consent, and the servitors around the room stirred from stillness. The Inquisitor turned his gaze away, as though the sight of a soul surrendering was too intimate even for him. The chains relaxed by a fraction, enough for sensation to rush through the limbs they had claimed. Pain bloomed where blood returned. It was sharp, bright, and human. The demon shivered inside me, savoring it the way one might savor a lost flavor rediscovered. "You see," it whispered. "They need us. Pain is the bridge. Without it, they would never reach their god." Marchett extended his staff until the shard hovered an inch from my brow. The air grew dense around it, vibrating with a sound too low for the ear but perfect for the bones. The circle of light that once had measured my heart now expanded, climbing up the walls, weaving new sigils that hung in the air like constellations. I could feel their geometry pressing against my mind, rearranging thought into obedience. "This vessel," Marchett intoned, shall serve as conduit. The horror within shall see only what I show, hear only what I command, through agony order, through sacrifice, sanctity. The acolytes echoed his words, each phrase splintering through the vox grills into metallic chorus. My skull became their altar, my flesh the parchment on which their theology was written. The demons stirred in rhythm with their chant, humming a counterpoint that threatened to undo the harmony. I felt the pull of it, one direction toward the Emperor's light, the other toward an endless mirror where my reflection bled into shadow. Then the staff touched me. It was not impact, but intrusion. A single thread of silver light entered my mind, coiling through memory. I saw my past unfurl like a banner, the fields of my homeworld scorched by war. The orphanage turned shrine where I had once sung praises, the moment of discovery when forbidden text spoke of freedom as if it were not sin. Each image burned away as the light passed, leaving only silhouettes. You remember the calling? Marchette asked, voice almost gentle. I tried to reply, but found that my tongue obeyed two masters. The demon spoke through me, smooth as oil. He remembers. I remember. We remember. The tone was wrong, mocking yet sincere. The Inquisitor's jaw tightened, but he did not recoil. He pressed the staff deeper against my skin until sparks danced in the air. Then remember this, he said. A rush of warmth exploded behind my eyes. For an instant I saw not the chamber but a world of molten gold. A vision of the Astronomicon itself, the Emperor's beacon pulsing across the void. It was so bright that it hurt to perceive, a light that burned truth into lies. And in that brilliance I saw a shadow kneeling before the throne, hands raised not in worship but in apology. The vision collapsed. I gasped, dragging air through the mask like a drowning man through reeds. Marchette lowered his staff and spoke not to me but to the skull that hovered at his shoulder. It responds to the beacon. That is promising, promising. The word tasted bitter. I wanted to tell him what I had seen, the kneeling figure, the sorrow beneath the light, but the demon warned me in silence. Do not share what is ours. He would carve it from you and call it salvation. The Inquisitor studied me for a long moment, then turned toward the acolytes. He will be moved to the forward sanctum. The next trial requires proximity to the warp core. The acolytes bowed, and the Skitarii stepped forward to release the floor anchors. My legs buckled immediately. Unused to bearing their own weight, they caught me with mechanical efficiency, their grips firm but not cruel. The chains remained, though lengthened now to allow motion. As they led me from the chamber, the demon whispered again, softer than before. Step carefully, little shell. Every path in this ship leads inward. The corridors beyond the sanctum were narrow, lined with pipes that sweated condensation and whispered binary hymns. Red lumen strips cast everything in the hue of blood seen through water. Servitors passed us in silence, their faces blurred by the mist of coolant. The further we walked, the louder the hum became, the same pitch that had haunted me since awakening, now swelling into a symphony of machines dreaming in metal. We descended into a chamber vast enough to hold a cathedral. The air shimmered with heat from the warp core suspended above, a sphere of caged brilliance surrounded by rings of script that moved too quickly to read. Around it, priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus drifted on hover platforms, their limbs a forest of cables. They chanted to the machine spirits, and the ship answered with the creak of stressed hull and the deep resonant heartbeat of reactors fed by faith. The Skitarii halted me at the edge of a glowing dais. Marchette followed close behind, his silhouette a black line against the sun core. Here, he said, you will learn control. The warp responds to will. If yours holds, we may use you to reach where even sanctioned psychers cannot tread. He gestured, and the acolytes connected my chains to pylons embedded in the floor. Energy rippled through them, rising in frequency until my teeth ached. The demon inside me laughed quietly. He thinks the leash is his. He forgets that leashes run both ways. Begin the resonance, Marchit commanded. The pylons flared. A column of light enveloped me, and suddenly every nerve was a conduit. I could feel the warp pressing against reality like an ocean against glass. Shapes moved within it, too large, too ancient to comprehend. Some noticed me. Their attention was weight, and under that weight I began to fracture. I screamed, not from pain, but from recognition. The warp was not distant. It was memory, magnified. Every thought I had buried returned as form. Guilt became claws, regret became eyes. The demon pushed through the cracks, guiding my terror into focus. Hold, little shell, shape it. Do not flee from what you are. I reached inward, found the pulse that was mine and not mine, and pushed back. The light wavered. For a heartbeat I stood between worlds, half shadow, half man. The pylons strained. Alarms flared in machine voices. Marchit's command cut through the chaos. Seal him. The containment field slammed shut. I collapsed, smoke rising from my skin. The demon retreated, laughing like a tide withdrawing from shore. Marchit approached and knelt beside me, his expression unreadable. You held it longer than I expected. I tried to speak, but only blood came spattering the floor in patterns that looked like writing. He stood, turning away. Rest if you can. Tomorrow we see if endurance can become mastery. As they dragged me back toward darkness, the hum of the ship shifted. It was no longer just machinery. It was breath. Mine, the demons, the vessels, merged into one. Somewhere in that rhythm, I thought I heard a prayer, soft and distant, rising through layers of metal and void. Endure, for through agony, order, and for the first time, I wondered if the voice belonged to me at all. The hum of the warp core never stops. Even when I close my eyes, even when I try to fold my thoughts into stillness, it is there, vibrating in marrow and machine alike, whispering the rhythm of an infinite storm restrained by prayer. I've begun to feel its cadence as a heartbeat, not of the ship but of something larger. A pulse that spans the void itself. It's strange how sound becomes comfort when everything else has been stripped away. The silence between notes terrifies me more than the scream of energy that surrounds me, because in that pause I can hear my own mind unraveling. They have moved me to a smaller chamber adjacent to the reactor sanctum. The walls are covered with purity seals and script so dense it looks like rust. A single lumen flickers overhead, stuttering in time with my breath. Every time it dies and reignites, shadows dance along the sigils as though trying to escape their shapes. I sit chained in the center, wrists bound to an iron ring bolted into the deck. I don't struggle anymore. Not because I've surrendered, but because motion feels unnecessary. The demon inside me sleeps fitfully, murmuring through the seams of my thoughts like steam through cracked pipes. When it dreams, I see colors that don't exist. I try to count the hours by the shift of light through the narrow vent above me, but on a void ship, time means nothing. There is no dawn here, no dusk. Only the steady decay of lumen strength and the distant echoes of Mechanicus hymnals bleeding through the walls. Sometimes the singing stops, replaced by metallic thuds, footsteps, or the static hiss of a Vox exchange carried along the conduits. Those are my favorite moments, reminders that somewhere beyond my sanctum the living still breathe, still labor, still believe. I cling to those noises like relics of sanity. But the longer I remain, the more I start to hear patterns in the noise. At first it was simple. A sequence of thuds repeating every few minutes like a heartbeat echoing through the hull. Then came whispers, too faint to form words, but rhythmic enough to feel intentional. When I pressed my ear against the floor, I could almost make out voices woven beneath the vibration of the reactor. Fragments of prayers or warnings, indistinguishable from one another. The demon stirred each time I listened. They speak to me, it said once, half asleep. or to what I used to be. I don't know how long I sat there listening before the door opened. The sound was soft but absolute, the seal releasing pressure with a sigh. A figure stepped through, robed in black, face hidden by a respirator mask shaped like a beak. I recognized the gait immediately. Interrogator Ceres, Marchit's shadow and scholar of pain. He carried a small case of polished bone and knelt just outside the circle of runes that defined my cage. "You've lasted longer than the others," he said, voice filtered through Vox distortion. Marchit is so impressed. I tried to laugh, but the sound came out as a rasp. "You mean he hasn't burned me yet?" "That would be wasteful," Ceres replied, opening the case. Inside were slender instruments, needles, vials of green fluid, and a single crystalline shard that pulsed faintly with internal light. "You were a psyker once, weren't you?" "I was a man once," I said. He tilted his head. "We all were. But the warp takes and reshapes. The difference between heretic and saint is often the hand guiding the chisel." He extracted one of the needles and approached the edge of the runic circle. The demon woke, its laughter silent but tangible, rippling through my veins. "He cuts flesh to feed faith." How quaint. I bit down on the inside of my cheek to drown it out, tasting blood as my only proof of ownership. Ceres extended the needle toward me but stopped just short of the boundary. "This will hurt," he said. "Everything does." He nodded, almost respectfully, and stepped across the threshold. The moment his boot touched the circle, the air shivered. The runes flared, reacting to his presence, and for an instant his shadow split into three. One human, one mechanized, one something else entirely. He ignored it, thrusting the needle into my shoulder with practiced precision. The fluid burned cold. My vision doubled. Every sound in the chamber stretched into melody. The drip of condensation, the pulse of the warp core, the faint rattle of my chains, all twisting together into a pattern I recognized but could not name. Ceres watched closely, adjusting dials on the injector cuff around his wrist. "Good," he murmured. "The resonance holds. The demon's frequency aligns with the reactor's harmonic. This might work after all." "What might?" I managed to choke out. He smiled beneath the mask. "Communication." The word struck deeper than the needle. "With what?" "The machine. The warp, the Emperor. Whichever listens first." The demon shivered in delight. The blind reached for the sun again. The chamber tilted. I felt the light of the lumen stretch into threads weaving around my body like a cocoon. Through it I sensed the ship itself. Every conduit, every servo, every pulse of plasma, all singing the same low note. My consciousness blurred, expanding outward until I could taste the static on the air. I was part of the ship's nerve network, an unwilling conduit linking flesh and machine through the warp's whisper. For a heartbeat, I heard them clearly. The other voices within the metal. Not demons, not human. Spirits of the machine, ancient and weary. They spoke in pulses of meaning rather than words. Contain, sustain, protect. And beneath it all, a single phrase repeated like a wound reopened. "The light is dying." Then the connection broke. The circle snapped shut and I collapsed forward, gasping. Ceres withdrew the needle and sealed the case. "You heard something," he said. "Yes," I whispered. "They're afraid." "Of what?" I looked up, and for a moment the demon and I shared the same voice. "Of silence," Ceres froze. Behind the mask I sensed a flicker of unease. "Rest," he said after a moment. "We'll continue tomorrow." He turned and left without another word, the door sealing behind him with a sigh that felt almost human. When the chamber returned to darkness, the demon spoke softly, almost tenderly. "He thinks he learns from us, but it is we who listen, and through us the ship sings." The hum deepened, vibrating through iron and bone alike. I closed my eyes and let it carry me, half afraid, half in awe as the song of the exultant grief filled my veins. Somewhere within it, faint but undeniable, another heartbeat joined the rhythm. Not mine, not the demons, not the ships. Something else had begun to listen. I woke to the sensation of cold air stroking my lips through the mask, a fleeting mercy that tasted faintly of mint and machine grease. The hum was there, steady as ever, but now another rhythm nested inside it like a moth within a sleeve. It moved with cautious intention, testing the weave of sound until it found a stitch to pull. I pressed my ear to the deck, ignoring the bite of parchment-sealed manacles against my wrists, and felt that shy pulse knock once, twice, pause, then knock again. It wasn't the clang of servitors or the footfall of Skitarii. It was softer, alive, and it carried the tremor of fear across the iron like a confession whispered under breath. The demon roused as if to a lover's touch, and tried to answer with a ripple of heat along my spine. I forced it back by calling up the memory of rain that no longer fell on my world, the drumming on slate roofs, the smell of wet stone and copper coin. The ship listened. The pulse returned. I understood it then, not as language but as intention shaped into pattern. Someone was seeking not my voice but the echo it made when it passed through me. My mouth dried. I swallowed and tasted iron. The lumen overhead flickered on a new beat as if the chamber itself was counting. "Who are you?" I breathed, the words fogging the mask. The answer came as the gentlest rise in the hull's vibration, a small swell that made the chains whisper against their hooks. It found an interval where the reactor's hymn dipped low and laid its message across that trough like a leaf on a slow river. I felt it more than heard it, a name worn thin by long use, Aaliyah. It drifted to me wrapped in the scent of old incense and burned vellum. A choir's echo carried along a pipeline. The presence inside me perked up with interest, tasting the syllable, turning it over. A choir's ember, it purred, half mocking, half reverent. One of those who speak across the void with their eyes shut and their souls open. She will know the taste of the beacon. She will know when it dims. I pressed my cheek harder to the deck. "Aaliyah," I whispered back, "if you are real, stop. They will feel this. They will stop you." A pause like held breath. Then with delicate stubbornness the pulse returned, a 3-beat signature that found a hollow in my ribs and tapped there as if knocking on a door. Not a question, a bond. The demon hummed appreciation, and with that hum came a quick sting as the runes along my arms warmed to scold it. It laughed softly and retreated to watch. The door's seal sighed. I flinched away from the floor and tried to reset my face to the blankness that cost the least. A Skitarii stepped in, helmet sealed, optic glare washed pale by the lumen. He held a metal cup. His movements had the careful economy of a soldier who had spent too many hours near fragile, incendiary things. He stopped just short of the boundary and extended the cup toward the line of sigils with a small, steady hand. "Permission," he said, voice filtered to something close to monotone. The servo skull that had waited above me like a patient moon descended a fraction, lenses whirring. Its vox cracked. "Granted," the Skitarius crossed. The runes brightened, tasting him. I saw his rank glyph etched faint on a vambrace, Ranger Sergeant Havel. He held the cup to the mask's intake and tapped a valve. Cold water slid through. It tasted like metal and mercy. I sipped until he withdrew it. "Thank you," I said, surprised by the way gratitude softened my jaw. He didn't answer. The visor hid his eyes, but his pause said something like acknowledgement. Or perhaps it was habit misread as grace. He backed out of the circle with the same precise care, set the cup on a bracket as if offering it to the machine spirits, and turned without flourish. The servo skull followed him to the threshold, hovered, and remained, a sentinel caught between curiosity and instruction. The pulse found me again as soon as the door sealed. Aaliyah. Stronger now. steadier, like a hand braced on a railing. I let it pass through me and out again along the long bones of the ship, not amplifying, not guiding, just refusing to be a wall. Meaning came in flashes stitched by the warp's breath. Cold choir, the taste of ash on the tongue, a window with no glass that looked on forever, the distant pressure of command. Beneath that, fear shaped like a candle guttering in a draft. The phrase I had stolen from the machine spirits earlier rose again, but this time it was warmer, sadder, belonging to a human throat. The light is dying. I shut my eyes until colors blossomed behind them. Rumor, I whispered to myself, to the demon, to the ship. We do not know. The demon rolled like distant thunder. She knows it is pain. That is a kind of truth. The hum shifted. The sensation was subtle but certain, a recalibration of pitch that made my teeth itch. The servo skull twitched, caught it as well, and rose several spans to listen. A beat later, the chamber's vox grill crackled, coughed up a ribbon of binary that simplified into Low Gothic. By order of Inquisitor Marchett, subject is to be moved. Event: minor storm in the Imperium. Testing window opens. Prepare for transit. The chains snapped taut as locks disengaged. They didn't remove them. They never did. Two acolytes entered in the same uniform steps as the others, faced blank behind boxes and lenses, and unhooked the ring at the floor. Havel returned with them, his stillness now a barrier against the tremble I saw in the younger acolyte's hands, when a rune spat a warning spark. They guided me, not unkindly, through the narrow arteries of the ship. As we walked, the hum thickened into a sound that couldn't decide if it was heard or felt, and the air took on the taste of dust heated for the first time in years. I wondered if Aaliyah felt our passage the way I had felt hers. A slight pressure across the ribs, a tremor of intention. I whispered her name once, not with breath, but with the thought that passes for breath in a place like this, and the pipes shivered in answer. Not words, a companionship. The forward sanctum opened like a wound. It was cleaner than the first. The rust only decorative. The sigils cut deeper. The purity seals crisp and white and still smelling of sanctum wax. At the center stood a low dais ringed in pylons that hummed at a frequency just shy of headache. Above it hung a cage of light like a chalice caught mid-pour, brimming with motes that fell and rose in slow tides as if the gravity here had grown contemplative. Marchett was already present, accompanied by 3 tech priests whose faces were almost entirely replaced by chrome logic. Sierra stood to one side, hands folded, the bone case at his feet, the crystalline shard resting upon his palm like a patient star. Marchett watched me approach, his posture that of one measuring increments on an invisible scale. Stormfront in the Imperium, he said, as if narrating a weather report instead of a metaphysical threat. Our navigator reports ragged currents. Such turbulence renders some paths unsafe and others briefly possible. We will use you to listen where our usual instruments cannot. If the beacon's song has altered, even faintly, the machine spirits will tremble. You will tell me where. My throat worked. And if I break? He did not look away. Then we learn where not to tread. The demon snorted, pleased by the honesty. He is efficient. I like efficient men. They bleed cleanly. They set me on the dais. The pylons brightened to a hunger that felt like a hand cupping my skull. Saris approached with the shard and spoke a word too pure to be corrupted by vox static. The word locked the mask open and filled my lungs with cold air until it hurt. He touched the shard to the center of my brow and a light spilled into thought. For an instant I saw myself from outside, a figure restrained by lit scripture, a man-shaped problem wearing a halo of borrowed geometry. Then perspective snapped back and the light threaded deeper, down into the places where names go to rot. Listen, Marchett said. I did. I let the hum pour through me without wrestling it into meaning. I let the ship's nerves braid around my bones. I extended nothing outward. I merely stopped being a fist and became a palm. The warp met that shape with the cunning of a river that always finds the lowest place. It sank into me and flowed on, and through that flow I felt the storm the navigator had tasted. A ragged swell, currents colliding in catastrophes of color, the suggestion of jaws forming where currents met. I heard machine spirits chanting themselves brave. I felt the navigator's third eye blink open behind steel shutters and weep salt into her hood. I felt Aaliyah's pulse steady into a soldier's cadence even as her breath shortened with the strain of staring into too much truth. And behind it all, for a heartbeat only, the beacon. The Astronomicon did not speak to me as a man speaks. It made a pressure in the mind shaped like horizon. It was not weaker. It was not stronger. It was different. A tiny shift in flavor, like copper water poured into a clay cup. The demon hissed softly. There. Taste it. A note gone half a fraction flat. He will want to know that. It pressed the knowledge forward with unexpected gentleness, not because it loved Marchit, but because it loved the elegance of the pattern changing. The pylons screamed. A surge hit clean and merciless. For an instant I was split into filaments, a human comb raking the storm for data. Through that lattice a single voice reached me. Not machine, not demon, not inquisitor. Aaliyah. The word she sent could have been a prayer or a warning or merely a name. But thrown across that sea it struck with the weight of an oath. Hold, I tried. Saints witness me, I tried. The surge lifted me like a fish yanked from black water into brighter black. My back arched. My teeth cracked. The shard on my brow burned cold enough to blister. I felt the sigils on my arms flower open and close, petals of pain keeping the larger horror out. Somewhere at the edge of sight, Sarah said a number as if it were a mercy. Marchette said nothing, then silence, not absence of sound, absence of hum. The ship's song cut off like a throat slit mid-hymn. Every sigil in the sanctum glowed with the startled brightness of a thing that has forgotten how to be a wall. The pylons dropped to a whisper. The servo skull sagged in the air as if a string had been cut. For a single suspended moment I could hear only breath. Mine ragged in the mask. Saris measured through the respirator. Havel calm and precise as if counting until the world resumed. The demon leaned forward inside me with a hunger so pure it left me clean. Do you feel it? It asked, voice like a hand on the back of my neck. The quiet, that is what the spirits fear. That is what I remember from the long before. The moment between heartbeats when the universe forgets to lie to itself. Marchit moved first. He turned his head a fraction, listening to something distant through a bead in his ear, and his hand tightened on the staff until the obsidian shard throbbed like a warning. Geller field fluctuation, he said quietly. Minor. Correcting. The hum returned a second later, shivering at the edges like a candle bullied by a draft. Breaths released. The servo skull bobbed, ashamed of its fall. The sigils dimmed back to discipline. Marchit looked at me then, really looked, weighing the tremble that had found my hands, the way my eyes flicked to the ceiling as if to chase a fading star. Well, he asked. My mouth tasted like blood and coins. I thought of lies. I thought of loyalty. I thought of the word Aaliyah had sent and the way it had felt when the hum stopped. A cliff's edge encountered by a sleepwalker. The demon waited, indulgent. It would enjoy any of my answers for different reasons. The song changed, I said at last. Only a fraction. But I felt it. They all did. I licked copper from my lip, and for a breath there was nothing. Marchit's expression didn't change, yet the air around him thickened as though the words had physical weight. He drew a slow breath through the filters of his helm, a rasp of static and meditation. Nothing, he repeated, turning the syllables over like a coin. Describe it. I closed my eyes. The taste of it still clung to my mouth, copper and snow. The hum stopped. The light went with it. For a heartbeat there was only awareness without sound. like the moment between a dying man's last inhale and the body's realization that it will never draw another. And in that silence I hesitated. Something waited. Not hunger. Not hate, just waiting. The demon uncurled within me, whispering, "You nearly saw it then." The truth that frightens gods. The universe was a wound before it was a word. I forced the thought away, but the echo lingered like heat after a burn. Marchett paced the perimeter of the dais, his fingers brushing the glow lines of the pylons, coaxing them back to steadier rhythm. "The Astronomicon cannot fall," he said at last, more to himself than to any of us. "If it falters, the Imperium collapses into night. Yet what you describe—" He stopped, looking up toward the distant ceiling as if he could see past metal and bulkhead to the bleeding horizon of the warp. "It has happened before once. During the Age of Apostasy, they said the light flickered. The navigators went blind. Ships wandered into forever." He turned back toward me. "But you are the first to feel it this closely." "I'm not the only one," I said, voice hoarse. "There was another." A choir voice. "She called herself Aaliyah." Saris flinched, a motion so slight it might have been the tremor of a servo. Marchett's head tilted fractionally. "The choir aboard Exultant Grief is sealed. None communicate with the sanctum during transit." "You could not have heard her?" "I did. I lifted my head as far as the chains would allow. She said the same thing your machine said, that the light is dying." Marchett's jaw flexed. For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face, anger tempered by fear. "You will speak of this to no one. Not even to your own reflection." He gestured, and Saris approached with the shard still glowing faintly. "Seal him. We'll make another pass when the warp currents calm." The shard touched my chest, and a cold numbness spread through me. The lights blurred into halos, and the sounds of the sanctum receded into a single endless tone. The demon laughed quietly in that dim place between waking and oblivion. "You've planted the seed. Now watch what grows in his silence." When awareness returned, I was alone again. The hum had settled back into its usual cadence, but beneath it the new rhythm persisted. Quieter, patient, a secret heartbeat stitched into the machinery. I lay still, counting its pulses. Each one carried a faint resonance, the memory of Aaliyah's voice threading through metal corridors and vox conduits like a ghost in prayer. Hours, or maybe days, passed before the door opened. This time it was Havel. He moved differently, slower, the carefulness of someone hiding tremors in his hands. He placed a tray within the rune's boundary, a metal cup of water, a square of ration paste. He didn't meet my eyes. "What's happening?" I asked. He didn't answer, only adjusted the tray until it was perfectly centered, then backed away. But as he turned, his voice broke its modulation, soft and human. "Something's wrong with the Geller field," he whispered. "The priest won't say it, but the hymn keeps missing a note." He left before I could reply. The demon chuckled, low and approving. Even the obedient can hear when faith skips a beat. That night, or whatever passes for night aboard a void ship, the hum shifted again. The missing note stretched longer, widening the gaps between pulses. Through those cracks I could hear whispers. Not from the demon, not from the machine. 1,000 tiny voices murmuring in a language of longing, calling across the iron. I pressed my forehead to the deck, listening. Somewhere deep within the ship, something answered. A rhythmic pounding began, faint at first, then louder, like fists beating against metal from the inside out. The demon stirred with delight. Ah, they wake. The walls remember what they were built to hold. I tried to reach for prayer, but the words that came were not mine. By his light we endure. By his silence we learn. My own voice sounded foreign, distorted by the chamber's echo. The pounding grew until the whole sanctum trembled. Sparks rained from the pylons. The runes flared one by one, warning sigils turning crimson. A klaxon screamed. The servoskull descended in a frenzy of buzzing wings. Containment breach detected Deck 9 Bioward 43, it blared. Demonic incursion probability, 68%. The demon whispered, "It begins." Then, through the static, I heard her again. Aaliyah. Clearer than before. Her voice laced with fear and awe. "Can you hear it?" The throne is silent. The word struck like a hammer blow. The demon's laughter roared through me, shaking the chains. Silence at last. The empire built on screaming finds its breath gone. The lights died. The hum vanished. And for the second time there was nothing. A silence deeper than vacuum, vast enough to swallow thought. My heart stuttered once, then matched that emptiness beating in its rhythm. In that void, I felt the presence of countless souls across the ship. Praying, screaming, disbelieving, all suspended between devotion and despair. And through that silence came a new sound, faint but rising, the slow cracking of metal, like ice beneath a frozen sea. Something was coming through. The first crack ran like lightning through the deck beneath me. It wasn't loud, and the sound was small, intimate, a hairline whisper, but every nerve recognized it as prophecy. The silence before it had been complete, the kind that erases distinction between heartbeat and hull, between thought and void. When the metal side opened, it felt less like rupture and more like revelation. The ship admitting that all along, its bones were borrowed from the dead. Lumen globes flared back to life in feverish sequence, a panic of light struggling to re-establish order. The sanctum's sigils blinked in disarray, some sputtering into nonsense, others burning brighter than command codes could justify. I could smell the insulation in the walls turning to ash. The demon inside me flexed, stretching like a predator that has scented open air. "Freedom wears many faces," it murmured, some shaped like mercy, some like incompetence. Then came the screams, distant, muffled through bulkheads, but unmistakably human. The chorus of 1,000 throats discovering that prayer and breath can end on the same note. I felt them as tremors through the floor, each death a pulse that rippled outward, feeding the warp storm clawing at our hull. The exultant grief was bleeding souls into the void. The door to my chamber slammed open. Cirrus stumbled through first, his respirator hissing like a dying lung. Behind him, Havel and 2 acolytes dragged a field generator the size of a sarcophagus. Blue light bled from the seams of the device, throwing their faces into corpse pallor. They were speaking over each other, their words lost beneath the groan of the reactor above. Only fragments reached me. Containment. Breach vector. Choir pit. Subdeck collapsed. Cirrus caught sight of me and crossed the rune boundary without hesitation, though the sigils spat arcs of white around his boots. "It's feeding through you," he said, breathless. "Whatever hole the storm found, it uses you as conduit. We must re-anchor the field." He gestured, and the acolytes rolled the generator to the center of the dais. Havel's hands moved with precise calm, his mechanical fingers darting between runes like insects tracing pollen lines. I saw faith on his face, not piety, but the cold devotion of function fulfilled. The machine obeyed him because he believed it would. "What happened?" I asked, my voice a raw rasp. Cirrus didn't look up. The choir tried to sing against the storm. Half of them ruptured. The rest burned out their minds. "We lost the Geller harmonics for 43 seconds. His tone faltered. "Marchit is in the reactor sanctum, trying to commune directly with the core spirit. He thinks he can stabilize it." The demon stirred with interest. He would speak to the heart of the storm. Admirable hubris. I strained against the chains. "Release me." Cirrus laughed, short and cracked. "You're the eye of this hurricane. You think I'll unmake the only wall left standing?" "You said it's feeding through me," I hissed. "Then use me, don't cage me." He hesitated, eyes narrowing behind the lenses. "You would help?" "Help myself, perhaps." I leaned forward as far as the bindings allowed. But if the ship dies, so do I. Whatever's inside wants survival as much as it wants freedom. Give it a direction. He looked to Havel. The ranger sergeant's visor turned slightly, the faintest shake of the head. Cyrus ignored it. If I untether you even partially, you'll obey? I'll try, I said, and meant it, though the demon chuckled in my bones. Cyrus reached for the clamps. The generator pulsed once, a deep throbbing sound that made the air buckle. The runes on my arms flared, chains retracting like snakes uncoiling from prey. My knees hit the deck, bones singing with static. The demon inhaled through me, a sound like wind drawn through broken glass. And for a moment my vision filled with wings of smoke. Direct the flow, Cyrus commanded. Think of containment. Anchor it here. I reached inward toward the thing that lived inside the hollow of my spirit. It met me halfway, amused, indulgent. Together we shaped the current pouring through the ship, the raw psychic torrent of the warp trying to remake reality. I felt it twist toward me, a tide of uncreation, and I gave it form. Circles within circles, the language of the wards, but written in thought instead of ink. The torrent slowed, condensed, found boundaries. For a heartbeat, the noise of the storm receded. I could hear individual voices again, sobbing acolytes, distant hymns crackling through broken vox. Cyrus exhaled a prayer of thanks. Then Marchit's voice filled the chamber, broadcast through the ship's vox like a liturgy of steel. All hands maintain station. Containment achieved. By the throne we endure. The demon's laughter shivered down my spine. Endure. Such a generous word for unfinished dying. Cyrus slumped against the generator, sweat beading on his brow. It worked, he whispered. You held it. For now, I said. A new sound answered, the thrum of boots in the corridor. The door slid open again, and Inquisitor Marchit entered, cloak torn. His staff blackened as though it had tasted lightning. He looked older, edges worn, but his gaze burned with undiminished intent. Release him, he ordered. He's stable enough. Cyrus hesitated, then stepped back. The generator dimmed. The last of the chains withdrew. I rose slowly, every muscle trembling. The air smelled of ozone and sanctified oil. Marchit studied me. You've saved the exultant grief, whether you meant to or not. But we are not finished. He turned to the others. Leave us, they obeyed without protest. The door sealed, locking the two of us in the after-echo of the storm. The Inquisitor's voice softened, almost human. You felt it, didn't you? The silence, I nodded. I've devoted my life to the throne, he said, pacing, to the great machinery that holds mankind together. But today I touched its edge and found nothing there. No light, no will, only absence. He stopped before me. Tell me, when the Emperor's voice falls silent, what answers the prayers of men? The demon stirred eagerly, whispering, Ask me. I have always answered, I swallowed hard. Maybe that silence is his answer, I said. Maybe it's our turn to speak. Marchit's eyes glinted. A heretical mercy, he murmured. And yet, perhaps necessary. He reached out, placed a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it heavier than any chain. You and I will go to Terra when this voyage ends. I will bring what you've seen to the Conclave. They must know. The demon smiled through my skin, to the heart of faith, to the golden throne itself. I approve. The ship groaned around us as if in agreement or warning. Marchit withdrew his hand and raised his staff, tracing a small circle of light in the air, a mark of binding and protection both. Rest. Tomorrow we chart a new course. He turned toward the door.